Everybody's got a motor car today. Whatever make it is the best, of course, they say. You can have your Morris Cowleys or your Essex 6, but believe me, they're not in it with my little bag of tricks. It's an Austin 7, a little baby Austin, the cutest little car upon the road. I can drive it anywhere you want.
My first drive was with the family doctor's car, an old Renault, and he would come to visit us, and he'd probably give me a lift back into Halesowen, where I'd maybe pick up a prescription or something like that and take it back home. I was more concerned in being seen, sat in this motor car, than any particular enjoyment of the ride.
Upstairs, downstairs, in my latest chamber, it matters not at all. You think it's rather small, but believe me, boy, it's heaven. It never stops, but if you do, you only need a shove if you drive a little Austin 7.
Under that, it's half empty. So how did it come, is it, that you came to the design of such a small engine after looking at the larger models that were produced in the period just after the war?
The one I really looked at was an air-cooled engine of a motorcycle, the FN, a Belgian. I had no idea that the interest would be such as it has grown to today. It was just a job of work, and I was very pleased to be able to do it. I came to engineering through drawing. I was able to draw, and I was able to adapt my ordinary art room drawing to engineering drawing, and as such I became, even before I went to Austin, quite a proficient draftsman. First of all, I didn't go into the drawing office. They sent me into the factory where an experimental aeroplane was being built. It was 1917, August, and I was then just 14 years that age. Well, of course, the war came to an end, or we saw that it was coming to an end in late summer of 1918. We knew it couldn't continue much longer. On this occasion, I approached myself, went down to the drawing office and saw the chief draftsman down there and asked if I could move in, to which, again, he was able to consult the drawing work I'd done in the aeroplane drawing office. They had been working on the 20-horse car and found it was a consumer of petrol. It didn't take on as they anticipated.
We were having difficulty financially. So much so that we had to seek help from the banks. And on one occasion, we were so close to catastrophe that Billy Roots, later Lord Roots, and George Heath, another big distributor of ours, each came to the rescue with £5,000 to pay the wages. We hadn't enough money in the bank to pay them. And it was during that period that Lord Austin had the inspiration, I think one might call it, of the car for the million, the little car. He was interested in it because he was quite convinced that the motorcycle and sidecar was not comfortable enough for the public.
In the old main offices, you went in under the clock. And the main drawing office was on the left-hand side very shortly after you went in. I've often wondered why, again, I was accepted. I must have been good. But accepted I was, and it was the Holy of Holies, because although he never said anything to the people concerned, he always knew the people who were engaged in the car drawing office. By he, I mean Sir Herbert himself. I can remember what the drawing office was like very well indeed. Every man had a separate desk, and that desk consisted of a wooden structure. On his right-hand side would be a drawing cabinet for a full-size drawing, and then he had his board in front of him and about the same width for drawings for reference, and that was the common desk throughout the office. There were glass panels around the offices. The glass panel had the advantage of us being able to see when he was at home, and in the reverse order, he could see whether we were hard at work or not. I went on the train at 8 o'clock in the morning. Sir Herbert also used to get down to the works at work starting time, 8 o'clock. And occasionally, maybe once or twice a week, he would come walking round, looking at what was going on in the drawing board, and sometimes he couldn't find what he wanted. As I'd got nothing to do till 9 o'clock, he would ask me, where did they keep the so-and-so drawing, or could I tell him who was working on such and such a job, and I did my best to help him. After a bit, I ventured to ask certain questions about what he was looking at, and he never hesitated and would give me a straight answer. I don't say this was very long conversations, but he knew I existed, and I very much knew that he existed. I got a message during the day to go in and see the chief draftsman. Well, I thought, this is it. And especially when he said, "Sit down, Mr. Edge," very formal, I thought this is what one or two have been in and had a handshake, and not a golden handshake, but a handshake, and a departure. And I thought, this is my turn. And he said, the chief draftsman said to me, "Mr. Edge, Sir Herbert wants you to go up and work at his house. Work for him." And he said, "But before you say yes or no, he wants you to go home and ask your parents if they are agreeable to that, because it will mean you leaving home and living away." I was a motorcycle rider then. We never fell out, Sir Herbert and I, but he hated motorcycles. He couldn't ride them, and he hated them. But I had to get there. And I went up there on the Sunday morning and arrived at about 10 o'clock. And Sir Herbert was at the door to greet me. This was the room I first came into on one Sunday morning towards the end of August in 1921. And of course then it was fully furnished and all along here were his calf-bound volumes of books in his library. And on the billiards table, he'd got his idea of a 7-horse car sketched out freehand, more or less full size, and he showed it me and said, "This is something what I want you to work on." Of course, it was not easy to start to know what he really wanted, but he would leave some sketches, and I would start drawing them out on the drawing board in the recess in the billiards room. I knew nothing about the rest of the car. I knew nothing about rear axles. I knew nothing about steering. I knew nothing about brakes. Only casually, you see. I had never worked on those. So in the first instance, I had to do what he told me. Until the end of 1921, we'd tried all sorts of engine sizes and car shapes. We had cars which only had rear wheel steering, and we had cars which were diamond shaped, all very ridiculous and all very interesting talk. But at last, at the end of the year, the car, more or less as it exists today, with a 3'4" track and a 6'3" wheelbase, was in shape. Then, a few days before Easter, 1921, he said, "Get all these details together and meet me down at the works on Tuesday after Easter." And so on the Easter Tuesday, I went down, so many years ago today, to the works, and I discovered that he'd got a boarded up section which no one could see into, and in that section he had facilities for assembling cars.
Computer graphics system. You'll find one of the first things that's changed is, in fact, we now work in a 3D model mode. So where we're looking at your crank before, we now have the opportunity of putting that crank into a 3D model on a computer screen. That gives us many advantages. The first one is that we can now begin to look at further detail on the screen. So we get movement, we can explode, we can take it back down again. So what we try to show you, Stan, is the nature of the data you've created as a designer and the way it's used by a number of areas.
I should like to see somewhere produce a prototype from nothing in 6 weeks, and whether it would have gained by taking 6 months or 6 years, I really don't know, but 6 weeks was the time. He aimed and almost succeeded in getting those cars built for Whit Monday, from Easter Tuesday to Whit Monday. We certainly built one complete car, which was a runner. And I remember Sir Herbert himself was the first man in, and as he was taking a bend rather fast, the wheel came off. That wasn't known to the assembled public. They had a carnival up on what is called the flying ground. It's all built over now, and Sir Herbert showed these cars. I was too nervous to go up. And I stopped down in the office.
A few weeks only, there was much amusement, both from the press and from people who were driving them, but it was remarkable how quickly people took to it. And it was called the Baby Austin. And we could sell as many as we could build. spite of them being very high priced. They were, I think, £220 the first lot. And the ambition of Lord Austin was the £100 motor car, which ultimately it was. Being in the experimental shop, I was instrumental in developing the engine to get all the horsepower possible to race. I ultimately got him to agree that we would have a real try at racing. And it was at that time that I prepared, early in 1923, a car and took it, just a single car, down to race at Monza. And the reason for going so far away was, as I said to him, well, if we lose, it's so far away nobody will know, but if we win, we can get a bit of publicity. And that's actually what happened. I was fortunate enough to win, but that started us off. I liked it very much. There was a feeling of power behind you, you know, and we got to the stage later when you put your foot on the accelerator, you really had a push in the back. I had one experience on Brooklands on a 100-mile or 200-mile race, I've forgotten which, but we were all on grids. The big cars were on number 1 grid, and then the medium ones, and the 3/4 litre on the back. On the front row, there was Bill Guinness, Diane Seagrave, Malcolm Campbell, and Perry Thomas, all the 4 real fast ones. Oh, and another John Cobb, 5 in the row. And the flag went down, and the next thing I knew was the car I was passing, and it was Diane Seagrave. And after the race, he came up to me and he laughed. He said, "You know, Arthur, I thought I'd forgotten to get into gear." Now, the acceleration of that little car was so great that I went from the rear grid up and led for about a 1/4 of a mile. The majority of the onlookers were interested in the small car because it was possible to buy them, whereas a lot of the big racing cars, they just were not on the market. They were pure speed machines. The little car was most popular.
Suspension, sports suspension, flight strap to make sure we don't have any disasters if it blows off over the top.
Your price right, we'll charge you. It'll be very cheap.
That was just about as short as you could get. although it was always mighty tight here,
Yes, that's right.
that was the body man who
Yeah.
got it too close, not me.
Oh, I see.
Anyone who comes to an Austin 7 rally soon gets tied up with other people who've got similar cars, and you're soon sort of under the bonnet or discussing various problems that you've had.
If you're seen on the roads, 20 years ago when we first bought ours, I mean, most people use them as their everyday transport.
Oh, I just liked the character. I was a student at college at the time, and it was economical to run, and I just liked the character.
TT replica cars, I think. It's got a gravity tank over the front, whereas the later cars have got a tank behind the later saloons.
That's what we want, and we found one in in Bristol in the middle of a bramble bush for £100. So
every time you push the clutch down, you bend the crank. The watch the Centenary bearing out.
And that mad vet in the late 30s made a big hole there in his car to put his sheepdog in. They went all the way up to from Land's End, John O'Groats and back again, with the dog stuck in the back there.
It takes up a lot of my life, and probably more than my wife would like. The children go out with me under protest now and again, don't you?
Yeah. All right. A bit noisy.
It's brilliant. Open air, fresh air. Gets a bit cold in the winter there.
There's so many different ones, and they're all so beautiful, aren't they?
Being able to use it and go out and about in it is the attraction, not just having it, using it.
Part of the fun when you break down and you fix it there and then. You can't do that with a modern car.
We had a birthday party when it was 50 years old. Yes, we were in the middle of rebuilding it then, but we had it out on the front lawn and invited the neighbours in.
They're so popular that the spares are cheap for them. You can do most of the work on them yourself, and they're good fun.
I never actually owned one for above 3 days on end. During the 30s, we used to go to the local agent in Lincoln, buy one, 14 or 15 pounds, and use it to go to Nottingham or Leicester. Used to take the car back on a Monday and sell it back to the agent at town. So I was a regular owner for a few days at a time.
Yes, yes, yes. We first met Stanley when he introduced himself to us, and he just came along and said, I've had these drawings, and presented us with them. And of course he's been with us almost every year at a rally. For the last 12 years now, we see him at every rally regularly. He judges or presents prizes somewhere or other.
The fact that he's actually involved with Austin 7 and has a ride in them regularly, and people do ask him why something isn't working. He knows them inside out, and as opposed to being an honorary member and not doing anything, he's actually there answering questions and getting his hands dirty, which is very nice.
We stand united with Austin as our aim. Our purpose like
I'm very pleased that the initial work has had the success that it has. There's a sort of charisma about the 7, which is, I won't say unwarranted. I'm very proud that it emerged from comparative obscurity by the affection that these fans have for it.
we stand.